When digital forensics expert Dr. Miranda Cross first examined the 1871 daguerreotype of 5-year-old Abel Harrow, she noticed something that would haunt her for months. The ornate mirror positioned just behind the child's left shoulder seemed ordinary at first glance, but when she enhanced the image using cutting-edge restoration software, the reflection revealed something that should have been Brea. Impossible. While young Abel sat perfectly still for the camera, alive and breathing, his mirror image showed him lying motionless on the parlor floor, eyes closed, as if in death. What made this discovery even more chilling was that Abel Harrow died mysteriously just 8 months after this portrait was taken, and his grieving mother immediately smashed the mirror into 1,000 pieces, claiming it had stolen her son's soul. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The Harrow family portrait had been collecting dust in the archives of the Millbrook Historical Society for nearly 150 years when Dr. Cross first laid eyes on it during her research into 19th-century photography techniques. The Society's curator, elderly Mrs. Pemberton, had mentioned it almost as an afterthought while showing Miranda through the collection of local artifacts and documents that filled the Society's cramped basement storage area. "That one there gives me the shivers," Mrs. Pemberton had said, gesturing toward a wooden crate marked with faded ink. "Been meaning to have someone take a proper look at it, but honestly, most folks who see it don't want to spend much time with it." She pulled out the daguerreotype with careful, weathered hands, revealing the silver-plated copper image that had somehow survived more than a century of storage. The portrait showed a well-dressed family arranged in their parlor, with all the formal stiffness typical of 1870s photography. At the center sat 5-year-old Abel Harrow, his small frame dwarfed by an oversized velvet chair. His parents, Jonathan and Constance Harrow, stood behind him with the rigid posture that long exposure times demanded. The father's hand rested protectively on his son's shoulder, while his mother's fingers gripped the back of the chair with white-knuckled intensity that seemed to transcend the limitations of black-and-white photography. What immediately caught Miranda's attention was the exceptional clarity of the image despite its age. The photographer had been skilled, capturing not just the subjects but intricate details of the room itself. Heavy brocade curtains framed tall windows. Ornate furniture displayed the family's prosperity, and Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. But it was the tall mirror with its elaborate carved frame that dominated the left side of the composition, positioned at an angle that should have reflected the camera and photographer. The Harrows were one of Millbrook's most prominent families, Mrs. Pemberton explained as Miranda examined the daguerreotype under a magnifying glass. Jonathan owned the largest textile mill in 3 counties, employed half the town at one point. They lived in that big Victorian mansion on Elm Street, the one that's been empty for decades now. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. But tragedy seemed to follow them everywhere. First, their eldest daughter died of scarlet fever. Then, little Abel here passed away before his 6th birthday. Some sort of wasting illness, the records say, though the symptoms never made much sense to anyone. Miranda studied the child's face with professional interest. Even through the limitations of 19th-century photography, Abel appeared healthy and alert. His eyes held the bright intelligence common to children his age, and his posture suggested vitality rather than illness. Nothing about his appearance suggested the frail constitution that would claim his life within months. "What happened to the family after Abel died?" Miranda asked, still studying the mirror's reflection with growing curiosity. "The mother never recovered," Mrs. Pemberton replied sadly. "Constance became convinced that something supernatural had taken her son. She claimed the mirror in their parlor had somehow trapped his soul, showed her visions of his death before it happened. Jonathan thought she was losing her mind from grief, but she insisted the mirror was cursed. One night she took a hammer to it, smashed it completely. The servant said she screamed about saving other children from the same fate." This story alone would have been enough to entreat Miranda, but as she continued her examination under the magnifying glass, she began to notice details that didn't seem quite right. The mirror's reflection showed parts of the room that should have been visible, but there were subtle inconsistencies in the positioning of objects and furniture. More puzzling still, while the main subjects appeared sharp and clear, certain elements in the mirror seemed slightly out of focus, as if they existed in a different plane entirely. "I'd like to take this back to my lab for digital enhancement," Miranda told Mrs. Pemberton. "There might be details we can recover that weren't visible to previous researchers." She carefully packaged the daguerreotype in archival materials, her mind already racing with possibilities about what modern technology might reveal. Back at the university, Miranda's laboratory represented the cutting edge of digital restoration and forensic analysis. High-resolution scanners, specialized software, and computer processing power that would have seemed like magic to 1870s photographers allowed her to peer into historical images with unprecedented clarity. She had used these tools to solve everything from art forgeries to criminal cases, but the Harrow portrait promised to be one of her most intriguing challenges. The scanning process took several hours, with multiple passes at different resolutions to capture every possible detail from the silver surface. As the digital file took shape on her computer screen, Miranda could see immediately that this daguerreotype was something special. The level of detail was extraordinary, far beyond what she typically encountered in photographs from this period. She began with standard enhancement techniques, adjusting contrast and brightness to bring out hidden details. The results were impressive, but not unusual, revealing texture in fabrics, expressions on faces, and architectural elements that had been obscured by age and exposure. But when she focused her attention on the mirror's reflection, Miranda felt the first stirring of unease. The software allowed her to isolate and enhance specific portions of the image, and as she worked on the mirror section, disturbing details began to emerge. At first, she attributed the anomalies to digital artifacts or flaws in the original daguerreotype, but the more she enhanced the image, the more convinced she became that she was seeing something genuinely inexplicable. The reflection in the mirror showed the same parlor, but with crucial differences. While the main photograph captured the family posed for their portrait, the mirror seemed to reflect a different moment entirely. The parents stood in roughly the same positions, but their expressions were transformed. Jonathan's protective stance had become one of desperate grief, his face contorted with anguish. Constance appeared to be screaming silently, her hands pressed to her face in a gesture of absolute despair. But it was the child's reflection that made Miranda's hands tremble as she worked. While Abel sat alive and healthy in the main image, his reflection in the mirror showed him lying motionless on the parlor floor. His small body was positioned as if he had simply collapsed where he stood, arms at his sides, eyes closed in what looked unmistakably like death. The detail was so precise that Miranda could make out the pattern of the Persian rug beneath his still form. She spent the next 3 days verifying her findings, running different enhancement algorithms, and consulting with colleagues to ensure she wasn't seeing patterns that existed only in her imagination. Every test confirmed the same impossible result. The mirror reflection showed a scene that differed fundamentally from the main photograph, depicting what appeared to be the aftermath of the child's death months before it actually occurred. Miranda's reputation as a skeptical scientist made her reluctant to jump to supernatural conclusions, but she couldn't ignore what the evidence clearly showed. She began researching the history of spirit photography and other 19th-century phenomena that might explain the anomaly, but nothing quite matched what she was seeing in the Harrow portrait. Her investigation led her back to Millbrook in the Historical Society, where Mrs. Pemberton introduced her to Harold Grayson, a retired librarian who had spent decades collecting local folklore and the unexplained stories. Harold lived in a cluttered apartment above the town's old bookstore, surrounded by filing cabinets full of newspaper clippings, handwritten accounts, and photographs documenting Millbrook's stranger occurrences. "The Harrow case has always been one of our most persistent mysteries," Harold explained, as he pulled out a thick folder marked with faded ink. "Not just because of the boy's death, but because of what happened afterward." Constance Harrow wasn't the only person who claimed that mirrors showed impossible things. He spread out newspaper clippings from 1871 and 1872, yellowed with age but still legible. The headlines told a story of growing hysteria in the months following Abel's death. "Grieving mother destroys cursed mirror, read one." Another proclaimed, "Servants flee Harrow mansion after supernatural encounters." According to these accounts, Harold continued, several people reported seeing disturbing reflections in that mirror before Constance destroyed it. The family's cook, claimed she saw her own death reflected while polishing it one morning. The groundskeeper said it showed him events from years in the past, including the death of the Harrow's first daughter. But the most disturbing reports came from visitors who saw reflections of their children in states of distress or danger. Miranda studied the newspaper accounts with growing fascination. The descriptions were remarkably consistent, all involving reflections that showed events either from the past or future, rather than the present moment. "Did anyone ever try to study the mirror scientifically?" she asked. Harold nodded grimly. "A professor from the state university came to examine it about 2 weeks before Constance smashed it. Dr. Aldrich Weiss, an expert in optical phenomena and photography. He spent 3 days in the Harrow house, taking photographs and measurements. But he left abruptly without publishing his findings, and when other researchers tried to contact him later, they discovered he had resigned his position and disappeared." This information sent Miranda on a new research path. Tracking down records related to Dr. Weiss and his investigation, university archives contained personnel files and correspondence that painted a picture of a respected scientist who had become increasingly obsessed with what he called temporal optical anomalies in the months before his disappearance. In a letter to a colleague dated just days before he left for Millbrook, Weiss wrote, "I believe I am on the verge of discovering evidence that certain reflective surfaces can serve as windows into parallel temporal states. If my theories are correct, we may need to fundamentally revise our understanding of the nature of time itself." The letter was the last official correspondence in Weiss's file. After that, there were only concerned inquiries from colleagues and a brief note from the university administration stating that the professor had resigned for personal reasons and left no forwarding address. Miranda's investigation into Dr. Weiss eventually led her to a small town in northern Vermont, where local records indicated a man of that name had purchased property in 1872. The current owner of the land, a farmer named Bill Hutchins, remembered stories his grandfather had told about the previous owner. Grandpa said the professor fellow was strange, spent all his time in a workshop he built out behind the house. Bill explained as he led Miranda across his property. Never socialized with anyone, just worked on some kind of experiments involving mirrors and photography. The workshop burned down in 1875, and they found his body inside. Grandpa always said the professor looked like he'd aged 20 years, in just 3 years of living here. The site of the workshop was now just a depression in the ground covered by grass and wildflowers, but Bill's grandfather had saved some items from the fire. In the farmhouse basement, wrapped in oilcloth and stored in a wooden crate, Miranda discovered Dr. Weiss's research notes and several daguerreotype plates that had somehow survived the fire. Professor's handwriting revealed a mind descending into obsession and possibly madness. His early notes were methodical and scientific, documenting experiments with different types of reflective surfaces and their photographic properties. But as the dates progressed, the tone became increasingly frantic and the content more disturbing. The mirror from the Harrow house was not unique. One entry read, "I have now identified 17 similar objects across New England, all exhibiting the same temporal displacement properties. The phenomenon appears to be connected to traumatic events, as if intense emotional energy can somehow imprint itself on reflective surfaces and create windows into other temporal states." Later entries described Weiss's attempts to create his own temporal mirrors, using various combinations of silver, mercury, and other materials. He claimed to have achieved limited success, but the results apparently terrified him. "I have seen my own death reflected in the experimental mirror," one entry stated. "The image shows me consumed by flames, which suggests that my research may be leading me toward my own destruction. Yet I cannot stop. The implications for our understanding of consciousness and time are too profound to abandon." The final entry, dated just weeks before the fire, was barely legible. "They are watching me through the mirrors now. The images show not just possible futures, but alternative presents where different choices were made. I understand now why Constance Harrow smashed the mirror. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." Miranda spent days photographing and digitizing Weiss's notes and remaining daguerreotypes. Several of the plates showed images of mirrors reflecting scenes that clearly didn't match their surroundings, confirming that the Harrow portrait was not an isolated phenomenon. But it was the professor's theoretical framework that truly captured her attention. According to Weiss's research, certain mirrors seem to accumulate what he called temporal resonance when exposed to intense emotional events. This resonance could then manifest as visual anomalies that showed scenes from different time periods, particularly moments of high emotional significance like deaths, tragedies, or other traumatic events. The theory was clearly the work of a brilliant but unbalanced mind, yet Miranda found herself unable to dismiss it entirely. Too many pieces of evidence supported Weiss's conclusions, from the consistency of witness accounts to the physical evidence preserved in the surviving daguerreotypes. Her investigation took another turn when she discovered that fragments of the original Harrow mirror had not been completely destroyed. Harold Grayson's folklore collection included several accounts of mirror shards being found in and around the Harrow mansion over the decades, as if pieces of the original glass continued to surface despite Constance's thorough destruction. The mansion itself had been abandoned since the 1940s, when the last member of the Harrow family died without heirs. The property had passed through several owners, but none had lived there for long. Neighbors reported strange phenomena: sounds of children crying in empty rooms, shadows moving behind boarded windows, and occasionally the glint of reflected light from rooms where no mirrors should exist. Miranda obtained permission from the current property owner to investigate the mansion, which stood like a Gothic monument to 19th-century prosperity on Millbrook's once fashionable Elm Street. The Victorian architecture remained impressive despite decades of neglect, with elaborate gingerbread trim and tall windows that would have filled the interior with light when the house was occupied. Inside, dust and debris covered floors that had once hosted elegant social gatherings. Water damage had warped the hardwood and peeled wallpaper from the walls, but the basic structure remained sound. Miranda made her way to what had been the main parlor, where the original portrait was taken and where the cursed mirror had once stood. The room was smaller than she had expected, but she could identify the location where the family had posed by comparing the surviving architectural details with the daguerreotype. The tall windows, ornate moldings, and fireplace mantel all matched the photograph precisely. But what drew her attention was a series of small, glittering objects embedded in the wooden floor near where the mirror would have stood. Using tweezers and a magnifying glass, Miranda carefully extracted several small fragments of silvered glass from between the floorboards. The pieces were no larger than fingernails, but they bore the distinctive characteristics of 19th-century mirror glass, with its slightly greenish tint and irregular silvering pattern. As she worked, Miranda became aware of an unusual quality to the light in the room. Despite the boarded windows and dim conditions, the mirror fragments seemed to catch and reflect illumination from sources she couldn't identify. When she held one piece up to examine it more closely, she felt a chill of recognition. The fragment showed a reflection that didn't match her surroundings. Instead of the decrepit parlor where she knelt, the shard reflected what appeared to be the same room as it had existed in 1871, complete with period furniture and decoration. For just a moment, she thought she saw movement in the reflection, a small figure that might have been a child. Miranda quickly placed the fragment in a protective container, but the image remained burned in her memory. She collected several more pieces, each one seeming to hold its own version of the room's past, before leaving the mansion with her samples. Back at her laboratory, she subjected the mirror fragments to every analytical technique at her disposal. The glass composition matched 19th-century manufacturing methods, and microscopic examination revealed the intricate silvering patterns typical of period mirrors. But when she attempted to photograph the fragments' reflections, the results were consistently disturbing. Each piece seemed to reflect not the present moment, but scenes from the past, showing the Harrow parlor as it had existed when the family lived there. Some fragments showed the room empty. Others contained shadowy figures that might have been family members or servants. But several pieces consistently reflected the same scene: a small figure lying motionless on the parlor floor, while two adults knelt beside it in attitudes of grief. The implications were staggering. If Weiss's theories were correct, These mirror fragments retained some kind of imprint from the traumatic events they had witnessed, continuing to reflect moments of intense emotional significance long after they occurred. The technology to understand such phenomena was beyond current scientific capability, but Miranda felt compelled to document everything she discovered. Her research expanded to include other historical accounts of similar mirrors throughout New England. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Families would acquire ornate mirrors, usually antiques with unknown histories, and gradually begin reporting disturbing reflections that showed events from different time periods. In most cases, the mirrors were eventually destroyed or abandoned, but fragments would continue to surface for years afterward. One particularly detailed account came from Salem, Massachusetts, where a family had reported seeing Revolutionary War battles reflected in their dining room mirror during the 1920s. Another case from Concord involved a mirror that showed scenes from the Underground Railroad, including enslaved people hiding in rooms that had been sealed for decades. The common thread in all these cases was the connection to locations where intense human emotions had been experienced. Mirrors seemed to absorb and retain these emotional imprints, later reflecting them as visual phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Miranda's findings attracted attention from researchers in fields ranging from parapsychology to quantum physics. Some colleagues dismissed her work as elaborate hoax or misinterpretation of photographic artifacts, but others found the evidence compelling enough to warrant further investigation. Dr. James Blackwood, a physicist studying quantum consciousness at MIT, became particularly interested in the temporal aspects of Miranda's discoveries. What you're describing sounds similar to some theoretical models of consciousness that suggest emotional states can influence quantum fields in ways we don't yet understand, he explained during one of their consultations. If consciousness can affect quantum states, it's conceivable that intense emotional events could leave some kind of imprint on physical objects. This scientific perspective gave Miranda hope that the phenomena she had documented might eventually be explained through conventional means rather than supernatural theories. But it also raised disturbing questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Meanwhile, her investigation into the Harrow family history revealed additional layers of tragedy that seemed to support Weiss's theories about emotional resonance. The death of Abel's older sister from scarlet fever had occurred in the same parlor where the mirror stood, as had the death of Jonathan Harrow's father several years earlier. The room had witnessed multiple traumatic events over the decades, potentially accumulating the kind of emotional energy that Weiss believed could manifest as temporal anomalies. Public interest in Miranda's research grew after she published preliminary findings in several academic journals. The story attracted media attention, with reporters and television crews traveling to Millbrook to investigate the cursed mirror story. The Harrow mansion became a destination for ghost hunters and paranormal investigators, though Miranda discouraged such visits as potentially dangerous. Her concerns proved justified when several people reported experiencing disturbing episodes after visiting the mansion. A paranormal researcher claimed to have seen his deceased father reflected in windows of the abandoned house. A local teenager reported seeing her own death in a mirror fragment she picked up from the property. In each case, the experiences left lasting psychological effects that required professional counseling. Miranda began to understand why Constance Harrow had been so desperate to destroy the mirror. The psychological impact of seeing impossible reflections, particularly ones that seemed to predict future tragedies, would be devastating for most people. She developed protocols for handling the mirror fragments safely, including protective equipment and limited exposure times. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Harold Grayson contacted her with news that construction workers renovating the old Millbrook Bank had discovered something unexpected. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, they had found a collection of items that appeared to have belonged to Dr. Weiss, including several intact mirrors wrapped in heavy cloth. Miranda immediately traveled to Millbrook to examine the discovery. The mirrors were smaller than the original Harrow piece, but appeared to be from the same period, with similar ornate frames and silvering techniques. Each one was carefully wrapped and labeled in Weiss's handwriting, with cryptic notes about their origins and properties. One mirror was labeled, Whitmore House, Child's Death, 1867. Another bore the inscription, Brennan Farm, Murder-Suicide, 1863. The note suggested that Weiss had been systematically collecting mirrors from locations where traumatic events had occurred, building a collection of what he believed to be temporally active objects. When Miranda unwrapped the first mirror for examination, she immediately understood why Weiss had hidden them so carefully. Even in the dim basement lighting, the reflections were clearly anomalous, showing scenes that didn't match the surrounding environment. The Whitmore mirror reflected what appeared to be a 19th-century nursery, complete with period furniture and toys scattered on the floor. But it was the largest mirror in the collection that truly captured Miranda's attention. The label read simply, "Harrow House, Original Pieces, Reassembled." Weiss had apparently collected fragments of Constance Harrow's destroyed mirror and somehow reconstructed a portion of the original surface. The reassembled mirror was approximately 2 feet square, much smaller than the original but clearly composed of pieces from the same source. When Miranda looked into its surface, she saw not her own reflection, but the Harrow parlor, as it had existed in 1871, complete with the family's furniture and possessions. As she watched, figures began to move within the reflection. She saw Jonathan and Constance Harrow going about their daily activities, but the scenes seemed to shift between different time periods. Sometimes the room showed the formal portrait session captured in the original daguerreotype. Other times it revealed more intimate family moments. Abel playing with toys on the floor, his parents reading together by the fireplace, servants going about their duties. But gradually, the scenes began to focus on more disturbing moments. Miranda watched as the reflection showed Abel growing visibly ill, his parents consulting with doctors who shook their heads gravely. She saw Constance spending hours staring into the original mirror, her face growing more haggard with each passing day. Finally, she witnessed the scene that the original daguerreotype had somehow captured in advance, Abel collapsing on the parlor floor while his parents rushed to his aid. The experience left Miranda emotionally drained and convinced that she was dealing with phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. The mirrors seemed to be more than simple repositories of visual information. They appeared to be windows into the past that could somehow influence present reality. Her research took on new urgency as she began to understand the potential dangers involved. If Weiss's theories were correct, these mirrors could have profound psychological effects on anyone who viewed them extensively. She documented her findings carefully, but restricted access to the mirrors themselves, recognizing that they represented both invaluable historical evidence and potential psychological hazards. The story of the Harrow mirror and Dr. Weiss's research eventually attracted international attention from researchers studying consciousness, quantum physics, and anomalous phenomena. Several universities established research programs to investigate similar cases, and Miranda found herself at the center of a new field of study that bridged science and the supernatural. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a psychology professor studying inherited trauma, contacted Miranda after reading about her research. Maria's work focused on how traumatic experiences could be passed down through generations, affecting descendants who had never directly experienced the original trauma. "What you're describing with these mirrors sounds remarkably similar to what we see in families dealing with inherited trauma," Maria explained during their first meeting. "The emotional imprints seem to persist across time and affect people who encounter them later, just like traumatic memories can influence behavior patterns in subsequent generations." This psychological perspective offered a new framework for understanding the mirror phenomena that didn't require accepting supernatural explanations. If consciousness could indeed influence quantum fields in ways that left lasting imprints on physical objects, then the mirrors might be acting as a form of environmental memory, preserving and replaying traumatic experiences for anyone sensitive enough to perceive them. Miranda began collaborating with Maria and other researchers to develop protocols for studying the mirrors safely while protecting subjects from potential psychological harm. They established strict guidelines for exposure times, mandatory counseling for anyone involved in the research, and procedures for safely storing or disposing of temporarily active mirrors. The work attracted funding from several government agencies interested in the potential applications of consciousness research. Miranda found herself leading a team of physicists, psychologists, historians, and other specialists in what became known as the Temporal Mirror Project. Their research facility, located in a converted warehouse outside Boston, housed the largest collection of anomalous mirrors in the world. Over the following years, the project documented hundreds of similar cases across multiple continents. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Mirrors exposed to intense emotional events would retain some kind of imprint that could later manifest as anomalous reflections. The phenomena seemed to be triggered by specific psychological states in viewers, suggesting that consciousness played a crucial role in accessing the temporal information stored in the mirrors. The research had practical applications as well. Law enforcement agencies began consulting with the project when investigating cold cases, particularly those involving missing persons or unexplained deaths. Several cases were solved when investigators were able to recover information from mirrors present at crime scenes, though the evidence was rarely admissible in court due to its unusual nature. Mental health professionals also found applications for the research in treating patients with post-traumatic stress disorder. Some therapists reported success using controlled exposure to temporally active mirrors as a way of helping patients process and integrate traumatic memories. Though the technique required extensive training and careful monitoring to avoid psychological harm. But perhaps the most significant impact of the research was philosophical. The discovery that consciousness could leave lasting imprints on physical objects challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality and the relationship between mind and matter. Universities began offering courses in consciousness studies, and several religious organizations revised their doctrines to account for the possibility of persistent spiritual imprints in the physical world. Miranda continued her research for another 2 decades, eventually becoming one of the world's leading experts on temporal mirror phenomena. She published numerous papers and books on the subject, trained hundreds of researchers in safe handling protocols, and helped establish international guidelines for studying anomalous objects. The original Harrow daguerreotype remained one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the field, serving as proof that temporal anomalies could be captured using conventional photography techniques. Museums around the world displayed copies of the image, though the original remained securely stored in Miranda's research facility due to its continued temporal activity. The Harrow mansion was eventually purchased by a historical preservation society and converted into a museum dedicated to 19th-century life and the study of anomalous phenomena. Visitors could tour the restored parlor where the original portrait was taken, though the room was carefully monitored for mirror fragments and other temporally active objects. Abel Harrow's story became a symbol of the profound connections between consciousness, emotion, and physical reality. His brief life and tragic death had somehow transcended the normal boundaries of time, creating a legacy that continued to influence researchers and scholars more than 150 years later. The mirror fragments from the Harrow house remained active, continuing to reflect scenes from the past for anyone sensitive enough to perceive them. Some researchers reported seeing Abel playing in the reconstructed parlor, his childish laughter somehow echoing across the centuries through the strange properties of silvered glass and human consciousness. In her final paper before retirement, Miranda wrote, "The case of Abel Harrow and the temporal mirror phenomena has taught us that consciousness may be far more persistent and influential than we previously understood. The emotional imprints left by intense human experiences appear to transcend normal physical laws, creating connections across time that challenge our most basic assumptions about reality. While we have made significant progress in understanding these phenomena, we have only begun to explore the implications for our understanding of consciousness, memory, and the fundamental nature of existence itself." The story of the little boy who sat for a portrait in 1871 continued to inspire new generations of researchers, each one drawn to unlock the mysteries of consciousness and time that his brief life had somehow illuminated. The mirror that had reflected his death before it occurred remained a testament to the enduring power of human emotion and the strange ways that love and loss could echo across the centuries. Dr. Miranda Cross had begun her investigation as a skeptical scientist, seeking to debunk what appeared to be photographic anomalies. She concluded her career as a pioneer in understanding how consciousness could influence physical reality in ways that science was only beginning to comprehend. The portrait of Abel Harrow had become far more than a historical curiosity. It had opened a window into the deepest mysteries of human existence itself. And in laboratories around the world, researchers continued to study similar cases, gradually building a new understanding of how memory, emotion, and consciousness could transcend the normal boundaries of space and time. Each discovery brought new questions about the nature of reality and the persistent power of human experience to shape the world in ways both visible and invisible. The boy in the 1871 portrait had achieved a form of immortality he could never have imagined, his story serving as a bridge between the scientific worldview of the modern era and mysteries that remained as profound as they were beautiful. His reflection in that long-ago mirror continued to remind viewers that some truths transcend the physical laws we think we understand, connecting us to deeper realities that exist beyond the reach of conventional explanation. As researchers delved deeper into the implications of temporal mirror phenomena, they began to understand that Abel Harrow's case was not unique, but rather part of a broader pattern of consciousness leaving lasting imprints on the physical world. The little boy who had died so young had somehow become a teacher for future generations, showing them that the boundaries between past, present, and future might be far more permeable than anyone had previously dared to imagine. Years after establishing the Temporal Mirror Project, Miranda received an unexpected visitor at her research facility. Catherine Blackwood, a woman in her 70s, claimed to be the great-great-granddaughter of Dr. Aldrich Weiss, the mysterious professor who had disappeared after investigating the original Harrow mirror. Catherine had spent decades searching through family documents and had finally located what she believed to be her ancestors' final research notes, hidden in a safety deposit box that had remained untouched for over a century. The documents Catherine brought were extraordinary, containing detailed diagrams and theoretical frameworks that went far beyond anything Weiss had recorded in his Vermont workshop. These final notes suggested that the professor had not died in the fire as previously believed, but had instead discovered a way to use the temporal mirrors as actual gateways, rather than mere windows into the past. Grandfather's stories always claimed that Aldrich didn't die in that fire, Catherine explained as she carefully unfolded the aged papers. The family legend said he had learned to step through the mirrors into different time periods, and that he chose to live in the past rather than continue in his own time. These documents seem to support that possibility. Quote, the papers described a process Weiss called temporal displacement, involving specific mental techniques, combined with prolonged exposure to temporally active mirrors. According to his notes, consciousness could be deliberately separated from its normal temporal anchor and projected into different time periods, allowing the researcher to experience past events as if they were actually present. Miranda studied the documents with a mixture of fascination and horror. If Weiss had actually achieved what he described, the implications were staggering. The ability to travel through time, even in a limited form, would revolutionize not just science, but human understanding of existence itself. But the risks would be enormous, potentially trapping consciousness in temporal loops or fragmenting identity across multiple time periods. The notes also contained references to other researchers who had supposedly achieved similar results, creating a secret network of temporal explorers operating throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Names and locations were scattered throughout the documents, suggesting that Weiss had been part of a larger investigation into consciousness and time that had been deliberately hidden from mainstream science. Miranda decided to investigate some of these references, beginning with a case in Charleston, South Carolina, where Weiss had noted the existence of a chronologically active mirror in the historic Pemberton house. Local records confirmed that the house had been owned by the Pemberton family for over 2 centuries, and current owner Margaret Pemberton, a descendant of the original family, agreed to allow Miranda's team to investigate. The Pemberton house was a magnificent antebellum mansion that had somehow survived the Civil War, Reconstruction, and 2 centuries of economic upheaval. Margaret Pemberton, a retired professor of Southern history, had spent her life preserving both the house and its contents, including several mirrors that had been in the family since the 1700s. There's always been something strange about the mirrors in this house, Margaret admitted as she led Miranda through rooms filled with period furniture and portraits. Every generation of Pembertons has reported seeing things that shouldn't be there, reflections of people and events from different time periods. My grandmother used to say the mirrors remembered everything that had ever happened in these rooms. The mirror that had attracted Weiss's attention was located in the main drawing room, an ornate piece with a gilded frame that stood nearly 8 feet tall. Even in normal lighting, Miranda could see that its reflections were subtly wrong, showing architectural details that didn't quite match the current room configuration. When her team set up their equipment to analyze the mirror, the results were immediately apparent. The reflective surface showed not just the present moment, but multiple temporal layers, creating a palimpsest of different time periods overlapping in the same space. They could observe slaves working in the room during the antebellum period, Union soldiers searching the house during the war, and generations of Pemberton family members going about their daily lives. But what made this mirror unique was its apparent ability to show multiple time periods simultaneously, rather than shifting between different scenes as other temporal mirrors did. The effect created a disorienting visual experience where past and present existed side by side, separated only by subtle differences in image clarity and color saturation. Margaret had brought out family journals dating back to the 1700s, documenting generations of encounters with the mirror's anomalous properties. One entry from 1864 described Union soldiers being terrified by reflections that showed Confederate troops still occupying the house. Another from the 1920s mentioned guests at a dinner party seeing slaves serving a meal that existed only in the mirror's reflection. The family has always believed that intense emotions somehow imprint themselves on the mirrors, Margaret explained. This house has seen births, deaths, love affairs, betrayals, and every other kind of human drama over the centuries. According to family tradition, all of those experiences are still here, visible to anyone who knows how to look. Miranda's investigation of the Pemberton mirror led to breakthrough discoveries about the mechanics of temporal reflection. Unlike the Harrow mirror, which seemed to focus on specific traumatic events, the Pemberton mirror appeared to record and replay a continuous stream of human activity. The difference suggested that temporal mirrors might operate according to different principles depending on their exposure to various types of emotional energy. Working with quantum physicists and consciousness researchers, Miranda's team developed new theoretical models to explain how emotional states might influence the quantum structure of reflective surfaces. Their research suggested that consciousness operated on quantum levels in ways that could create lasting changes in physical materials, particularly substances like silver that were already quantum mechanically sensitive. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a quantum consciousness researcher from Oxford, joined the project to investigate these theoretical implications. Her work focused on the possibility that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon that could influence matter in ways not yet understood by conventional physics. What we're seeing with these mirrors challenges our basic assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality, Dr. Morrison explained during one of the team's research meetings. If emotional states can indeed create lasting quantum imprints on reflective surfaces, we may need to completely revise our understanding of how consciousness interacts with the material world. The team's research attracted attention from unexpected quarters, including government agencies interested in potential intelligence applications. The ability to recover information from mirrors present at historical events could theoretically provide access to conversations and activities that had never been recorded through conventional means. Miranda found herself fielding inquiries from intelligence agencies, law enforcement organizations, and even military researchers interested in the potential applications of temporal mirror technology. While she recognized the legitimate uses for such research, she also understood the potential for abuse and insisted on strict ethical guidelines for any applications of their discoveries. The project's work also attracted criticism from religious groups and traditional scientists who viewed the research as either blasphemous or pseudoscientific. Several universities faced pressure to discontinue funding for consciousness research, and Miranda received both threats and passionate support from various organizations with strong opinions about the implications of her work. Despite these challenges, the research continued to produce remarkable results. The team identified over 300 temporally active mirrors across 6 continents, each one offering unique insights into the relationship between consciousness and time. Patterns began to emerge that suggested temporal mirror phenomena were more common than previously believed, but had been overlooked or dismissed by researchers who lacked the proper theoretical framework to understand what cries they were observing. One particularly significant discovery came from investigating a mirror in a monastery in Tibet, where Buddhist monks had been documenting unusual reflections for over 5 centuries. The monastery's records describe meditation practices specifically designed to interact with what they called time mirrors, using focused consciousness to access information from past and future events. The head monk, Lobsang Tenzin, explained their understanding of the phenomena through the lens of Buddhist philosophy. We have always known that consciousness transcends the limitations of linear time. What you call temporal mirrors are simply tools that make this truth visible to those Sia who have not yet developed the ability to perceive it directly. The mirrors reflect not just images but the karmic imprints left by conscious beings throughout history. This spiritual perspective offered new insights into the mechanics of temporal reflection, suggesting that the phenomena might be related to concepts of consciousness and memory that existed in various mystical traditions. Miranda began collaborating with scholars of comparative religion and philosophy to explore these connections, finding remarkable similarities between her scientific observations and descriptions found in Bika, ancient texts from multiple cultures. The investigation also revealed that temporal mirror phenomena might not be limited to manufactured mirrors. Natural reflective surfaces, including still water and polished stone, could apparently develop similar properties when exposed to intense emotional events over extended periods. This discovery expanded the scope of the research dramatically, suggesting that temporal imprints might be far more common in the environment than anyone had previously suspected. A particularly striking example came from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where researchers documented anomalous reflections in a pond located near one of the Civil War battle sites. The water's surface would occasionally show scenes from the battle itself, complete with soldiers and artillery that had fought there over 150 years earlier. Local park rangers had been quietly documenting these phenomena for decades, but had never reported them officially due to concerns about ridicule and disbelief. Miranda's team spent several months at Gettysburg, documenting the temporal reflections and correlating them with historical records of the battle. The accuracy of the details they observed was remarkable, including uniforms, weapons, and tactical movements that matched contemporary accounts with extraordinary precision. Some reflections showed events that had never been officially recorded, providing new insights into the battle that historians found invaluable. The Gettysburg research also revealed that temporal reflections seemed to be most active during specific times of year, particularly around the anniversary dates of the original traumatic events. This cyclical pattern suggested that temporal imprints might be influenced by cosmic or environmental factors that science had not yet identified. Dr. Morrison's quantum research began to provide theoretical explanations for these cyclical patterns, suggesting that consciousness might be sensitive to subtle electromagnetic and gravitational fluctuations that varied throughout the year. Her models proposed that the anniversary effect might be caused by quantum resonances between the original traumatic events and similar environmental conditions in subsequent years. As the Temporal Mirror Project expanded its research, Miranda began to notice that prolonged exposure to temporally active surfaces was having unexpected effects on the research team members. Several researchers reported experiencing enhanced intuitive abilities, including precognitive dreams and spontaneous insights into historical events they had never studied. Dr. Peter Vaughan, a psychologist studying these effects, documented consistent patterns of psychological change among team members exposed to temporal mirrors for extended periods. The phenomena seemed to be gradually sensitizing the researchers' consciousness to temporal information, he reported. It's as if prolonged exposure is training their minds to perceive quantum information that normally remains below the threshold of conscious awareness. These psychological effects raised new ethical questions about the research. While the enhanced abilities seemed beneficial in most cases, there were also reports of researchers becoming emotionally overwhelmed by the intensity of historical trauma they perceived through the mirrors. Several team members required psychological counseling to help them process the experiences they had witnessed. Miranda implemented new safety protocols requiring regular psychological evaluations for all team members and limiting individual exposure to temporal mirrors, The protocols also included meditation and grounding exercises, designed to help researchers maintain their connection to present moment reality while working with temporally active objects. The project's most ambitious investigation began when Catherine Blackwood provided additional documents suggesting that Dr. Weiss had discovered temporal mirrors at several locations across Europe. These sites allegedly included a mirror in the Palace of Versailles that reflected scenes from the French Revolution, and another in a castle in Romania that showed events spanning multiple centuries of vampire legends. Miranda organized international expeditions to investigate these locations, working with historians, museum curators, and government officials to gain access to historically significant mirrors. The Versailles investigation required extensive negotiations with French cultural authorities, but eventually resulted in one of the most significant discoveries in the project's history. The mirror in question was located in the Queen's apartments and had been removed from public display decades earlier due to what museum staff diplomatically described as unusual optical properties. When Miranda's team was finally granted access to examine it, they discovered temporal reflections of extraordinary clarity and detail, showing scenes from throughout the palace's turbulent history. The most dramatic reflections showed events from the French Revolution, including scenes of the royal family's final days and the violent aftermath of their execution. But the mirror also displayed centuries of court life, from lavish parties during the height of the monarchy to secret meetings and romantic encounters that had shaped European history. French historians working with the team were amazed by the accuracy of the details they observed, including conversations and private moments that had never been recorded in any historical document. The mirror seemed to preserve not just visual information, but somehow captured the emotional essence of the events it reflected, allowing observers to sense the fear, joy, ambition, and despair of the historical figures they witnessed. The Versailles mirror also demonstrated the most sophisticated temporal properties yet discovered, showing the ability to respond to observers' focused attention by revealing specific time periods or events. Researchers could apparently direct the mirror's temporal focus by concentrating on particular historical questions or periods, suggesting an interactive relationship between consciousness and the temporal information stored in the reflective surface. This interactive capability opened new possibilities for historical research, allowing scholars to essentially interview the past by focusing their attention on specific questions and observing the mirror's response. Several historical mysteries were resolved through this process, including the true circumstances of certain political assassinations and the locations of lost treasures that had been hidden during times of war. But the most significant discovery at Versailles was evidence that some historical figures had been aware of the mirror's temporal properties and had deliberately used them for their own purposes. Documents found in the palace archives referenced a magic mirror that could show future events, and several political decisions appeared to have been influenced by information obtained through temporal reflection. This evidence suggested that temporal mirror phenomena had been influencing human history for centuries, with certain individuals gaining advantages through access to information from different time periods. The implications for understanding historical events were staggering, raising questions about whether some major historical developments had been shaped by knowledge obtained through temporal means. Miranda's team began investigating other historical accounts of prophetic mirrors and crystal balls, finding numerous references that might actually describe encounters with temporally active reflective surfaces. Many famous oracles and fortune-tellers throughout history appear to have used mirrors or crystal spheres that could have been displaying temporal reflections rather than supernatural visions. The research took on new urgency as the team realized that temporal mirror phenomena might still be influencing current events through individuals who had gained access to temporally active objects. Intelligence agencies became increasingly interested in the project's findings, particularly the possibility that certain political or business leaders might be using temporal information to gain unfair advantages. Miranda found herself walking a careful line between scientific research and potential national security implications. She established protocols for sharing information with government agencies while protecting the academic integrity of the research and ensuring that the technology was not misused for harmful purposes. The project's final major investigation focused on a collection of mirrors discovered in a private estate in Scotland, where the owner claimed that his family had been guardians of temporally active objects for over 4 centuries. Lord Duncan MacLeod explained that his ancestors had been collecting such mirrors since the 1600s, recognizing their unusual properties and protecting them from those who might misuse their power. The MacLeod collection included over 30 mirrors of various sizes and time periods, creating what amounted to a museum of temporal phenomena. Each mirror displayed its own unique characteristics, from a small hand mirror that showed only the immediate past, to a massive hall mirror that could apparently access any time period within a 1,000-year range. Lord MacLeod's family had maintained detailed records of their experiences with the mirrors, creating an archive that spanned centuries of observations about temporal reflection phenomena. These records provided invaluable data about the long-term behavior of temporally active objects, including information about how their properties evolved over time and how they responded to different types of human interaction. My family has always understood that these mirrors are not mere curiosities, but powerful tools that require responsible stewardship, Lord MacLeod explained during Miranda's visit to his estate. We have seen what happens when such objects fall into the wrong hands, and we have made it our duty to protect both the mirrors and the people who might encounter them. The MacLeod archives contained accounts of mirrors being used to prevent disasters by warning of future dangers, but also stories of individuals who had become obsessed with temporal information and lost their ability to function in present reality. The family had developed techniques for safely interacting with the mirrors while maintaining psychological stability, knowledge that proved invaluable for Miranda's research protocols. Working with the MacLeod collection, Miranda's team made their final breakthrough in understanding the mechanics of temporal reflection. They discovered that the phenomena operated through quantum entanglement between consciousness and the crystal structure of reflective materials, creating information channels that transcended normal temporal limitations. Dr. Morrison's theoretical models finally provided a complete framework for understanding how emotional energy could create lasting quantum changes in reflective surfaces, and how consciousness could access this stored information through focused attention. The research demonstrated that temporal mirror phenomena were not supernatural, but represented an advanced application of quantum mechanics that humans were only beginning to understand. The implications of this final discovery extended far beyond the study of historical artifacts. If consciousness could indeed access temporal information through quantum entanglement, the potential applications for everything from medical diagnosis to technological development were limitless. The research suggested that human consciousness might possess capabilities that conventional science had never recognized or explored. As Miranda prepared to publish her final comprehensive report on 20 years of temporal mirror research, she reflected on how the investigation had begun with a simple daguerreotype of a 5-year-old boy and had evolved into a complete revision of scientific understanding about consciousness, time, and reality itself. Abel Harrow's portrait had opened a window into mysteries that would occupy researchers for generations to come. But the story was far from over. In the months leading up to her retirement, Miranda received an urgent communication from Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins who had been following the temporal mirror research with great interest. Dr. Chen had been working with patients who suffered from rare neurological conditions that affected their perception of time, and she believed she had discovered a connection between these medical cases and the temporal mirror phenomena. We have patients who claim to see events from their past or future during certain types of seizures, Dr. Chen explained during their video conference. Initially, we dismissed these reports as hallucinations caused by abnormal brain activity, but after reading your research, we decided to investigate whether these patients might actually be accessing temporal information through quantum consciousness mechanisms, similar to what you've documented with the mirrors. End quote. Dr. Chen's research team had been studying a particular patient, Anna Kowalski, a 42-year-old artist who had developed temporal seizures following a head injury sustained in a car accident 3 years earlier. During these episodes, Anna would report experiencing vivid scenes from her childhood, or glimpses of events that hadn't happened yet. Unlike typical hallucinations, Anna's temporal visions were remarkably detailed and often contained information she couldn't have known through normal means. Anna described her grandmother's funeral in perfect detail, including conversations between relatives that she was too young to remember when it actually happened. Dr. Chen continued. She also predicted her sister's pregnancy announcement 2 months before her sister even knew she was pregnant. We've documented over 50 instances where Anna's temporal visions had been verified through independent sources. This medical connection to temporal phenomena represented a breakthrough that Miranda hadn't anticipated. If certain neurological conditions could naturally activate the same quantum consciousness mechanisms that operated in temporal mirrors, it suggested that all human brains might possess latent abilities to access temporal information under the right circumstances. Miranda arranged to visit Dr. Chen's laboratory and meet with Anna Kowalski directly. The patient was a thoughtful woman with striking green eyes who spoke about her temporal visions with a mixture of wonder and frustration. "People think I'm crazy when I tell them what I see," Anna explained during their interview. "But I know these visions are real. I can feel the difference between memories, dreams, and these glimpses into other times. It's like suddenly being able to see colors that don't normally exist." And, working with Anna and Dr. Chen's team, Miranda designed experiments to test whether temporal seizure patients could interact with temporally active mirrors in ways that differed from normal subjects. The results were remarkable. When Anna was exposed to fragments of the original Harrow mirror during one of her controlled seizure episodes, she was able to provide detailed descriptions of events from the Harrow family's daily life that had never been recorded in any historical document. "I can see little Abel playing with wooden toys in the parlor," Anna reported during one session. "His mother is teaching him to read from a leather-bound book. She keeps looking at the mirror with such fear in her eyes, like she knows something terrible is going to happen but can't stop it." The level of detail in Anna's descriptions matched perfectly with the enhanced digital analysis of the original daguerreotype, providing independent verification of the temporal information stored in the mirror. These medical experiments revealed that temporal mirror phenomena might represent just one manifestation of broader quantum consciousness capabilities that existed in all human beings. The mirrors seemed to act as amplifiers or focusing devices for natural temporal perception abilities that were normally suppressed by the brain's filtering mechanisms. Dr. Chen's neurological research attracted the attention of Dr. Marcus Webb, a consciousness researcher who had been studying meditation masters and individuals with claimed psychic abilities. Dr. Webb's work focused on measurable changes in brain activity during altered states of consciousness, and he had documented unusual electromagnetic patterns in subjects who reported experiencing precognitive or telepathic phenomena. "What you're describing with the temporal seizure patients matches patterns we've observed in advanced meditation practitioners," Dr. Webb explained during a joint research meeting. "There appear to be specific neural networks that can access quantum information fields under certain conditions. Most people never activate these networks. But trauma, meditation, or exposure to temporally active objects might trigger their development." End quote. The convergence of neurological, quantum physics, and consciousness research created new possibilities for understanding human potential that went far beyond the original scope of the temporal mirror. Investigation. Miranda found herself at the center of an emerging field that combined elements of neuroscience, physics, psychology, and even parapsychology in ways that challenged traditional academic boundaries. The research team expanded to include specialists from multiple disciplines, creating what became known as the Quantum Consciousness Consortium. Their work attracted funding from sources ranging from government defense agencies to private foundations interested in human potential research. The consortium established research facilities at 3 universities and began recruiting subjects with various types of enhanced temporal perception abilities. One of their most significant discoveries came from studying identical twins, one of whom had developed temporal seizures following a head injury, while the other remained neurologically normal. Brain scans revealed that both twins possessed the same neural structures associated with temporal perception, but only the injured twin had activated these networks. This finding suggested that the potential for temporal awareness might be present in all human brains, but required specific triggers to become active. The consortium's research also revealed that exposure to temporally active mirrors could gradually activate these dormant neural networks in normal subjects. Individuals who worked with temporal mirrors for extended periods showed measurable changes in brain structure and function, developing enhanced abilities to perceive quantum information that existed outside BAS. Normal temporal boundaries. Dr. Linda Rodriguez, a psychiatrist specializing in consciousness disorders, joined the consortium to study the psychological implications of enhanced temporal perception. Her work revealed that individuals with active temporal awareness often experience significant challenges in adapting to their expanded perceptual abilities. Imagine suddenly being able to see every possible future outcome of your decisions, or being constantly aware of traumatic events from the past, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The human psyche isn't naturally equipped to handle that level of temporal information. We've had to develop entirely new therapeutic approaches to help people integrate these abilities without becoming overwhelmed. The psychological challenges of temporal awareness led to the development of training programs designed to help individuals safely develop and control their enhanced perceptual abilities. These programs combined elements of meditation, cognitive therapy, and exposure to temporally active objects in carefully controlled environments. Miranda became particularly interested in the ethical implications of temporal awareness research. If consciousness could indeed access information from different time periods, the potential for both beneficial and harmful applications was enormous. The ability to predict future events could prevent disasters and save lives, but it could also be used to manipulate financial markets or gain unfair advantages in competitive situations. The consortium established strict ethical guidelines for their research, including protocols for protecting the privacy of temporal information and preventing the misuse of enhanced perception abilities. They also worked with legal experts to address questions about the admissibility of temporal evidence in court proceedings and the rights of individuals whose private moments might be accessible through temporal perception. These ethical considerations became more pressing when the consortium discovered that certain individuals had been secretly using temporal awareness abilities for personal gain. A stock trader in New York was found to be using precognitive abilities to make investment decisions, while a professional poker player had been accessing temporal information to predict opponents' cards. The detection of these unauthorized applications led to the development of screening technologies that could identify individuals with active temporal awareness abilities. The technology raised new questions about privacy and discrimination, as employers and institutions began requesting temporal awareness screenings for certain positions. Miranda worked with civil rights organizations to establish protections for individuals with enhanced temporal perception, recognizing that these abilities represented a new form of human diversity that required legal and social accommodation. The consortium published guidelines for the ethical development and use of temporal awareness abilities, emphasizing the importance of voluntary participation and informed consent. The research also revealed that temporal awareness abilities appeared to be hereditary to some extent, with certain families showing higher rates of natural temporal perception across multiple generations. This genetic component suggested that temporal awareness might represent an evolutionary development that could become more common in future human populations. Dr. Chen's medical research identified specific genetic markers associated with enhanced temporal perception, leading to the possibility of predicting which individuals might develop these abilities, naturally or in response to triggering events. This genetic research attracted controversy from groups who worried about the creation of temporal awareness classes or discrimination against individuals who lacked the relevant genetic markers. The consortium's most ambitious project involved creating a comprehensive database of temporal information accessible through various mirrors and other temporally active objects around the world. This temporal library would preserve historical information that might otherwise be lost, while providing researchers with unprecedented access to past events. The Temporal Library project required careful coordination with museums, historical societies, and private collectors who own temporally active objects. Many institutions were initially reluctant to participate due to concerns about the safety and reliability of temporal research, but the consortium's rigorous scientific protocols eventually gained widespread acceptance. Working with the Temporal Library, historians were able to resolve numerous long-standing mysteries about past events. Archaeological teams used temporal information to locate lost cities and buried artifacts, while genealogists helped families trace their ancestry through temporal records that existed nowhere else. The library also revealed disturbing information about historical events that had been covered up or forgotten. Evidence of war crimes, political conspiracies, and social injustices emerged from temporal records that couldn't be suppressed or destroyed like conventional historical documents. This information raised difficult questions about how to address historical wrongs that were only now coming to light through temporal research. Miranda spent her final years as an active researcher, working to establish international protocols for sharing and protecting temporal information. She recognized that the discoveries emerging from the consortium's work would have profound implications for human society that extended far beyond scientific research. The establishment of the Global Temporal Information Council represented the culmination of Miranda's career, bringing together researchers, ethicists, legal experts, and government representatives from around the world to address the challenges and opportunities created by temporal awareness research. The Council developed international treaties governing the use of temporal information and established standards for protecting the privacy and dignity of individuals whose lives might be accessible through temporal perception. As Miranda prepared to step down from active research, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple examination of an old daguerreotype and had evolved into a complete transformation of human understanding about consciousness and time. The boy in the 1871 portrait had opened doorways to possibilities that would continue to unfold for generations to come. The final chapter of Miranda's research career involved returning to the original Harrow daguerreotype and the mirror fragments that had started everything. Using the advanced techniques developed over 2 decades of research, she was able to extract temporal information from the portrait that revealed Abel Harrow's final days in unprecedented detail. The enhanced temporal analysis showed that Abel had somehow been aware of his approaching death, displaying a spiritual maturity that seemed impossible for a child his age. In the days before his death, he had spent hours sitting before the family mirror, apparently communicating with temporal reflections that showed him glimpses of the future researchers who would one day study his portrait. Most remarkably, the temporal analysis revealed that Abel had deliberately posed for the portrait in a way that would preserve temporal information for future discovery. The positioning of the mirror, the timing of the photograph, and even Abel's expression had all been carefully arranged to create a temporal message that would only become visible when technology advanced enough to decode it. "I think he knew that someone would eventually understand what the mirror was showing," Miranda wrote in her final research report. Abel Harrow wasn't just a victim of temporal phenomena. He was a willing participant who helped preserve evidence that would eventually advance human understanding of consciousness and time. His brief life served a purpose that transcended the normal boundaries of existence, connecting past and future in ways that continue to inspire new discoveries." End quote. The boy who had sat for his portrait in 1871 had become the catalyst for discoveries that bridged science and spirituality, revealing connections between past and present that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence. His reflection in that long-ago mirror continued to inspire new questions about consciousness and time, ensuring that his brief life would have an impact that extended far beyond anything his parents could have imagined when they posed him for that fateful photograph.